So today's objective is to provide a little bit of background around the peer support area, provide information on the approach that we in the IK are going to be taking, outline the recruitment and selection process, and then there'll be a breakout into the breakout rooms where you'll have time to put together questions, and then we'll have a session back in the main forum where we'll hopefully deal with all those questions, and then we'll go through the next steps. So I have to say, personally, I'm really excited about this because I think this is something I've worked in before. I've seen what peer support groups can do and how they can make changes and help people. So I think this is a cause that's really close to my heart. So it's been brilliant to see the level of interest in it. And hopefully this is the start. So where are we now? Going to go through that. Where do we want to be? Where do we want peer support in the IK to be, and how are we going to get there? This is kind of the part I'm going to do with the first two parts, and then Patricia is going to drill down into more detail on it. So what is peer support? Well, the World Health Organization has a nice definition. It says peer support is based on the belief that people who have faced, endured, and overcome adversity can offer useful support, encouragement, hope, and perhaps mentorships to others facing similar situations. So I think it's fair to say that that happens all the time in the IKA, that so many of you have overcome huge challenges and have an awful lot of knowledge and insight. And, you know, sharing that knowledge and insight can help others in the same situation. And there's a whole range of peer support. If you look at the research, there's kind of informal peer support, which is happening at the moment in the IKA. Then there's structured peer support, which is an approach we're going to take. There's online peer support, Age Action run befriending programs. So there's a huge range of many different types of peer support. So today is about a first step in formalizing what we in the IKA do. So why is it important? Well, it's very important, and the research shows it actually works. That it works for people who are newly diagnosed with a long-term condition. It can really help talking to other people who, you know, have rebuilt their lives with this long-term condition. That's where it has the most benefit. But it also helps people who are feeling lost and lonely in the healthcare system, and they need one-to-one support from somebody else who's had similar experiences. And then people who are socially excluded through poverty, unemployment, or discrimination. Individuals with low motivation to self-manage, because we know being a kidney patient requires high motivation to do all the self-care that's needed. So peer support can be very helpful there. And then people who want or who are ready to start rebuilding their lives after experiencing a lot of challenges. And then people who want to continue their rehab. So it's a really, really powerful way of helping people. And many of you will be familiar with our lovely strategic plan, this document, which hopefully all branches got a copy of. And as you know, there's 5 themes around this. So peer support really falls into this area here, supporting patients and their families, and it has its own specific objective. What we're saying is that the support networks, and we've seen this so much in the IKA, whether it be branches, the sports team, that they're crucial to improving the experience of being a kidney patient. And what we want to do in this current strategic plan is enhance and really build on these, because we know that sometimes the best support is simply speaking with somebody who's been there and experienced it. So we're going to achieve this by establishing a local and national peer support network, which can be accessed online and face-to-face. Obviously, COVID has had a big impact on the face-to-face, and that these peer supports will be tailored to the stage that the patient is at. So you might have young people's groups, you might have people who've just gone on to dialysis, you might have people who maybe their transplant has failed. So it's really understanding what is most helpful to patients. And what are the intended outcomes? Is that patients have access to a peer support network that provides them with information support from those who understand best. Volunteerism, it's one of our core values, and that's going to remain central to the support we provide. But we want all patients to know that they are not alone. One of the things I've noticed is that the majority of patients are not members of the IKA, and a lot of the time patients don't know that we actually exist, which is quite concerning. And then by the end of this plan, that we've actually got somebody in who's independent and they've evaluated our peer support network so that we're able to say, this is working and it'll help us get more funding for these peer support networks. So what's our vision? What's the journey? Well, you can move peer support in so many ways. There's so many different aspects to it, but ultimately our aim is that every patient would have access to peer support. We'd like to see what they do in mental health services, that there is actually a peer support worker, a paid part-time employee in every renal unit, in every dialysis unit, and that they're an equal member of the clinical team, and that their views and their insights are taken very seriously. Okay. So that's our vision. Now that's a long way away. We've got to get the HSE to buy into this. We've got to get a community built up. We've got to, win the hearts and minds of the healthcare professionals as well, that this is not just an add-on, that this is a core part of the treatment service, that everybody has access to, that wants to have access to peer support, has easy access to peer support. So this is where PowerPoint sometimes. So where are we right now? Well, we know from talking to yourselves that it's limited support for the volunteers. Not all patients know about services. And access to peer support depends on where you live. So if you're in an area which is a very active branch, there's loads of peer support available. And in some branches, the dialysis unit even rings up the branch and says, look, so-and-so has just been diagnosed, can you give them a hand? So it's not routinely available. And you need to be able to travel. And then all the good ideas and knowledge, they're not being shared. They're not being spread across the IKA community. And then we have increased regulations. So we have to do safeguarding and we have to do Garda vetting. And our ability to attract funding, it's very much around, well, what are you doing in terms of quality standards? And it takes place informally in many different ways, teas, coffees after meetings and events, phone calls. Some branches do house visits, which obviously are on hold now, WhatsApp groups, Facebook, social media. So you can see it's already happening in the IKA, but very informally. And then the challenges are, obviously, coronavirus has had a huge impact on our branches because so many of our community aren't online. So the branches just aren't meeting, not even on Zoom. And then, some branches don't have enough volunteers. So there's a lot of challenges there in terms of people actually having access to peer support. But huge opportunities, just, the loyalty, the commitment and enthusiasm on this is amazing, from the board, from chatting to people. People really believe in the IKA. And I really believe that we can build a community network of skilled peer support volunteers and eventually longer term workers, people who are paid to do this. But obviously that's a good few years away. And what that will do is it'll enable us to be stronger in terms of campaigning for change in healthcare treatment systems, because we'll actually know what's going on the ground. We'll be talking to healthcare professionals and we'll hopefully have much better flow of information up and down so we can campaign more effectively. And that we'll utilize online platforms to support access wherever people are. So deciding where to go, we had to make a decision. And it was very much driven by COVID in terms of which way we're going to go. So we want to make sure that employees who are peer supporters, when we get there eventually volunteers and peers, that they're trained and supported. This is really important, that we help people to develop their skills and we support them on an ongoing basis. We don't put them in situations which are too much for them. That people can join and leave. I've had one person say to me, joining the IK sometimes like a life sentence. So, they want to leave, but they feel bad about leaving. So we want to make it clear that, you can do this for a couple of years and we're asking for a commitment of 2 years and then leave if you wish to and maybe rejoin. But that's, we're not expecting you to make a lifetime commitment. We want a very strong and resilient peer support team, that this is not just a group of individuals, but we're going to start building a community of people who've all been trained in peer support. that we get real-time feedback from members, which we'll capture on the database so that we can feed it into the political and the healthcare system much faster. And we saw this in COVID, where we were able to, not as quickly as I would like, but when we were seeing issues with people getting vaccinations, we were feeding that into the HSE very quickly, and they were then getting more communications out. So with a network of knowledge, learning and expertise with mutual support. So, people aren't left on their own, and once, good ideas are shared very quickly, that peer volunteer skills and qualities are recognized and valued, that it's seen that if you're trained as a peer volunteer, that there's some value in that, and it's recognized as being a quality expertise that people have, so that we're recognized as a center of excellence, that it's seen as the IKA are really, really good at this, and that we can share it with other healthcare organizations. And better support to members. Currently, we don't have a good system of when people ring for support that we can actually support them, because it depends on which branch they're in. And we want to encourage more volunteering. And we want to be a force for real change in the healthcare services. So that's quite important. That it's not just a local one-to-one kind of support, but that we use the experience and the knowledge and the insights we've gained to really lobby harder for change in the healthcare services. So we've a long journey, as you know, to get there. So how are we going to get there? Well, we're running this pilot, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And I'd like to thank the James Nolan of the Punchestown Kidney Research Fund, because they're actually funding the pilot. So just like to acknowledge their support for this. And then once the pilot is complete, we'll evaluate it and see what are the learnings from it, what went well, what didn't go so well, did patients actually benefit from it? And then that enables us to go for more funding to run it, and then that we would expand it, and it would become much more of a more people. We can train up more people, we can provide more supports, because even though it's all volunteer led, we have to support volunteers, and where volunteers incur expenses, we obviously want to be able to pay for those as well. So the initial pilot, it's going to be all online. That's really important. So it's either phone or it's Zoom or whatever technology we use. And basically what will happen is the patient or their family, because this is open to both patients and their families, they can email, they can phone, they contact reception online. And then we'll understand, we have a process to understand the need. What does that person actually need? What are they looking for? And then the coordinator, which is Aoife, will look at, in terms of that need, would this person benefit more from peer support, or do they actually need counselling? So there's a little bit of a triage there, because what we don't want to be doing is sending people who might need more support than can be provided by peer support. We don't want to be sending them to volunteers when actually they would benefit more from counselling. So there's a matching process, which is all about trying to make sure there's a connection between the peer support volunteer and the person looking for support. And Patricia will talk about that in more detail. And then we match them. And then there's 6 online contacts between the volunteer and the peer supporter. And then we'll ask both of them to do feedback and evaluation. We'll have a very structured process for that, where we capture the information. So I have to stress, this is a pilot, okay? We're not saying this is the be all and the end all of everything. We're saying in terms of getting something off the ground that we can demonstrate peer support works and get people trained up, we're going to do this initially, okay? So the skill set, what's our current skill set? And this is the important thing, because we have been doing it informally, but sometimes we've left people in very difficult situations, or we haven't provided the right kind of support. And as you can see from this photograph, just because you're a patient doesn't mean to say you can always listen. And it's important that when we provide peer support, that we're providing people who've been, who are able to listen. And some people do that instinctively, but it's actually a skill that everybody, including myself, has had to learn. And this is where we're going to provide training on this. So I'm going to hand over to Patricia now, and Patricia is going to go into more detail on the skill sets that we need to be successful in peer support. So I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully the technology will allow Patricia to share now. You might want to just unmute yourself there, Patricia.
I will do that. Great, thank you. I just have to move you all off the side of the screen. It's okay, and I go slideshow from. So can you all see that?
Yeah.
Great, okay. So first of all, thank you very much for the invite to come and meet with you all virtually. I think it's a milestone. It's a huge milestone today. A lot of work has gone to get it as far as it has, and I suppose thank you to everyone in the background there. And really what I'm really going to do is give you a bit of an overview of what a peer support volunteer might need to have in their back pocket before they come in, what's going to be how they're going to be supported, what sort of things will be going on, and some of the process around the matching, etc. So that just gives you an overview of what I'm going to be covering. So really, a peer support volunteer as a first and foremost, will be someone who will have self-experience either themselves or of a family member with end-stage kidney disease. So that's the baseline for actually engaging with it. So we'll be looking at things. They'll need to have a capacity to commit to the role requirements, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. They'll need to have some certain person traits and a level of self-awareness. They'll need knowledge and understanding of the Irish Kidney Association and the role itself. And then there'll be a couple of bits around, I'll mention about skills, both of the role. There's role skills, and there's also people skills that will need to be embodied as part of that role. So here is just an example of the person traits that we're looking at when a peer support volunteer will have things like common sense. I know it's something that people assume everyone has, but everyone doesn't have it, or we don't use it. We have it, but we don't always use it. We're looking for people who are going to be resourceful. We're going to be looking at people who will be able to use the self-experience they have and build on it. We need people who are open to learn, open to be with someone when maybe they don't know all the answers and go looking for help when they need it. We're going to need people who are very practical. We'll need people who are non-judgmental. I mean, this will all make sense to you, but I suppose it's good to say it out loud. We'll obviously people who are fair, who are dependable, because dependability is a really important piece, especially when people are going through a difficult time. You want to know that there's a consistency there. When it comes to, I suppose, attitude, it's looking at people who have a level of being optimistic and hopeful. You know, if a person is down in a hole struggling, you don't need to go down in there with them. You need people who can be optimistic and realistic at the same time. So it's having those and have a level of a cheerful disposition. One of the things that is, and it brings very much into the trauma-informed piece, is having a level of calm. So being able to manage stress well. It's a really important piece to it. Being level-headed and balanced. And solid and well-rounded, I suppose, in how they think and how they react, and also having a level of flexibility. I suppose when people are going through difficult times, these things can actually go out the window, and so therefore it's important that the peer support volunteer can actually hold a level of flexibility. Obviously, having a good nature, being respectful, very important. Being sensitive and empathic is really important. But I suppose one of the big things, and especially anyone who goes into a caring field, and you'll all know this, we are all a field of wounded healers. The important thing here is having a balance between empathy and self-care. So it's not a matter of just giving your last bit of energy to someone else and then being depleted. So being able to know when your own needs need to be addressed as well. Then things like being passionate. It's a new endeavor. There's going to be things learned along the way, and that's all part of the process, which is wonderful. But being passionate and holding the interest and keeping focused, really important pieces. Again, being patient and tolerant are other pieces that are really, really vital here. So that gives you a bit of a whistle-stop tour on the traits. There are many, many traits, but they're sort of the nub of what we're looking for. We're also looking at people who have the capacity to commit to the role requirements. I suppose the first thing is to be in the right place. If you're in the middle of your own treatment and you're really not in, your health is really struggling, it may not be the right time. So be very, genuine with yourself and be very self-caring and say, is this the right time? It's an important piece to ask. But then if you feel, yes, I'm interested in being involved, being able to commit the time. So there's the peer support volunteer role itself. And we will look at that at the end, but it's sort of looking at 4 hours a week of that in itself. And then there'll be an induction training, and I'll talk about that again in a few minutes. So there'll be an induction to actually get you up and running as a team, as well as giving you the skills, but also building up the team. There will be ongoing supervision, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, because people have different ideas of what supervision is. And then obviously team engagement, because it is a team, it is going to be a national pilot. So therefore it's wonderful that to have, I suppose Zoom has allowed that, and online platforms have allowed people to connect, which is wonderful. So you'll get the sum of all its parts, which is wonderful. And actually being able to call on each other, to also get some inspiration at times. So when it comes to the supervision, just to, when I'm talking about supervision, I'm talking about a support. It's something that's there to support people. It's not checking up on someone to see if they're doing it right. What it really is, it's about, having time, a protected time, regular protected time and space where you can explore things that are working well, to celebrate when things are working well, to look at any areas that might need attention, things that maybe you're struggling with, dilemmas you might have, if there's any areas of challenge that are showing up. Again, the other thing to look at is to reflect on the impact that the role might be having on you. Because, the reality is we're all human, and people being aware, and I'll talk a bit about this in a moment when it's about your own self-awareness is an important part, but being able to reflect on the impact, and maybe if you're getting triggered by what's going on, that's a really important piece. And any other needs that might be coming up. It might be things around professional practice or development, personal development, and then any practical issues that are turning up that you can discuss. So it's somewhere to bring any challenges or things that need a bit of attention. So it is really a very supportive structure, and hopefully people will actually benefit from that and actually use it well to their own benefit. From self-awareness point of view, it is really important that the peer support volunteer is self-aware. Because if we're not self-aware, we can get triggered very easily. So, being aware of what your own coping mechanisms are, and that's something that you'll bring as a skill set into the meetings with people as well. When you meet with other, whether it's family members or whether it's patients, being able to bring what worked well for you, but also keeping in mind, again, bringing in the trauma-informed piece that no two people are the same. So therefore, what worked for you may not work for someone else, and vice versa. So it might mean being creative, exploring, being very open about, talking to people how what works for them and building on that. So having your own self-awareness is really important. Knowing what your own limitations are. Many people have very different limitations. I have limitations, you have limitations, but knowing what yours are and bringing them to the table so we can work effectively. Again, I mentioned about triggers. Being able to manage your own condition is a really important piece as well, and having your own strategies in place. The other thing is to be aware we all have biases, and I've come across some people who say, well, I don't have biases, and I'm more worried about people who say they don't have biases, because we all have them, whether we're aware of them or not. So being aware of those is a really important piece, because you'll be working across many different people from different cultures, traditions, ways of being, so again, being aware of all of that. And having appropriate boundaries is an important piece. So what are your boundaries like? It's not the same as having a cup of tea with a friend. It's a much more formal process, and it requires things like confidentiality needs to be upheld. So it's not something that you can sit having a cup of coffee talking about stuff. So there is a boundary on it, really, really important. And, you know, if people are going to look for support formally, they'll want to know that they're supported in a way that's discreet and that is, I suppose, mindful of their, I would say, you know, their sacred space. It is a sacred space when people let you into their world. And then I've mentioned that self-care needs. That's a really an important piece of what's going to be going on. From the knowledge and understanding perspective, the peer support volunteer will need to have a knowledge and an understanding of the IKA and the role. So it's things like, what are the Irish Kidney Association's policies, practices and procedures? Now that's all of this is going to be covered in the induction. So don't panic if you don't know all of this. You're not expected to know all of it, but you need to have an openness to learn. That's a really important piece to it. So knowing how they do their business is important. Again, I mentioned about confidentiality and data protection. We're bound by those. Legally, we're bound by it. We're also bound by, safeguarding, and we're also bound by Garda vetting. They're just things we have to do. And they're not things that need to put people off. They don't disbar people from anything, but it's something that we need to be very mindful of. We need to also to have people who would have a knowledge of kidney disease across the stages. So if for example, if your experience is at a particular stage, you need to have a wider knowledge across the different stages, across the treatment types and across strategies that might be helpful. So it's really what you're trying to do is build up tools in your toolkit. That's really what we're talking about here. The other thing is peer support. And we'll be getting peer support back up on this to actually work with us to do some of the training on this. So looking at what is good peer support and what is recovery. So again, you know, it's everything from hope to keeping people's identity, you know, all of those, the chime for those of you who may know about recovery, but it's keeping people's hope very much to the fore. The other piece then is trauma-informed practice, and I'll be actually covering a day's training on this alone. And I've left it on the screen because you will be able to see this later on. But there are a lot of core principles when it comes to trauma-informed practice, which is going to be very much about what you probably already do, and it's just going to be bolstering it. But what it will have is a lens of knowing what is trauma, when someone is traumatized, what sort of side effects might come with that, what are the symptoms that come with it. How might you try and avoid re-traumatizing someone? How might you manage to keep it safe so that you can support someone and, you know, to be very safe in how you're doing that? How you build partnership, because partnership is a huge part to this. How to help people support enhanced control of their lives, of their mental health, all of those pieces. And we'll be coming back to them again in the training. Safeguarding, I've already mentioned. It's a very core part of it. And while we are not an organisation that works primarily with kids, when people are first diagnosed, they may be vulnerable. And so we have to be very mindful of when people are vulnerable, we have to be very, I suppose, aware of safeguarding. And then the other piece that comes in under that is suicide prevention. So there is a training module that's run by the HSE, and it's actually a really good one. It's the START training. So that'll be included in the training piece. So that's a knowledge of the role. Then when it comes to skills, there are some role skills and there's people skills. So there's the nuts and bolts of it would be around, you know, the use of the phone system, because that'll be a core piece. There'll be the logging of sessions on the CRM, the database. And then there'll be, again, everything to do with the PPPs are process, practice and procedures. So I just put that because it took over the whole slide. So that's the reason why I did that. From a skills side, when it comes to people, and I know Carol has already alluded to this, the active listening is an important piece. It's not about doing for people, it's about supporting people to find their ways. It's about actively listening to see what is it that they want to gain and help them to resource themselves. So that's a really important piece of what you'll be doing as a peer support volunteer. Communication. For anyone who's going to be in this role, communication is really, really important. Verbal, oral, and even on the database, etc. Again, there will be a training session on how to use the database later on. But so it's having an all-rounded communication skill that's very positive. Again, having the ability to support and empower others is a really, really important skill that you will need to have. So again, it's about being able to be mindful of yourself. So so if you're not okay, you're not going to be okay for someone else. So it's to be able to support people without doing things for them. So and maybe dealing with maybe being frustrated because you might feel you know what would work for them if they were you, but you're not them. So going at people's pace. So it's going at their pace, helping them uncover for themselves what is it that they may want, and then actually doing it at their pace. The other thing that the peer support volunteer will need to be able to do is to be able to give and take feedback. So again, they'll be able to give feedback on how things are going as part of supervision. It's very much a big part of supervision to give feedback on how the service is going. Is it going well for you? Is it not going so well? With a view to being able to improve where things are at. But also, it is a new role. And if you're not used to going formally with things, there are going to be differences. And so there are requirements to go with it. So, to be able to take feedback and not take that as a slight, but as something is about a growing knowledge in the background. The other thing that the person would need to be is a good team player. It's very much about team. It's building up the team of formal peer support volunteers in the organization. So being part of the team is a really important piece. Being able to collaborate and bring things back to the table that might be helpful in the wider context. So you might get a suggestion about what worked really well, and it might be something that others will benefit from, and vice versa. So to be able to give and take that feedback as well. So the other thing to keep an eye with the role itself. So it's about sharing your own experience where it's appropriate. Sometimes you'll find people who are not in a position and they don't want to, and it may not be safe. If they're traumatized, going into detail, and we will cover this in trauma-informed practice, there's times when it's not good to be talking about details, and there's times when it's okay. So it's learning all of that with a trauma-informed lens. It's about being able to promote recovery, support people through recovery, and knowing that recovery. It doesn't mean that you're going to have perfect health, but you can actually live well, with your diagnosis. So that's really helping people to be able to see that and to actually view themselves as more than what their diagnosis is. So it's about supporting enhanced quality of life. So QOL is quality of life and well-being. That's mental, physical. So promoting that. And it may be also providing information. There is knowing enough about services so that you can provide information if people need other services to link in with. And then there will be completing of admin duties. I mean, that sounds very serious, but it's like the database. It's like, the type of notes you might keep afterwards so that it can go into the database. So it's things like that, and looking for feedback. So there's admin duties that go with that. So looking at the commitment that's required. So there's a few things here, and it's recapping in a way, but I'm being more specific in this. It's the induction training to begin with. The induction training is going to take 6.5 days in total. They're not going to be all in one lump. We will be looking at that where that pans out. And there is a table of 1 day for this, half a day for whatever, so that we will have that available for you. There will be 5 hours approximately of online self-directed, and one of them is the safeguarding, and the other one is the START training, which is about suicide prevention. Then the peer support sessions themselves will be approximately 4 hours a week. That's the commitment required. And then the supervision and team. So there'll probably be supervision probably every second week to begin with, just so that you feel supported enough. Over time, that may turn into once a month, and then the team meetings might be, the other weeks. So that's where that's going to look. So the other thing is the CRM, which is the database. That's probably a 1 to 2 hour training, and the service phone is a 1 to 2 hour training. Yeah, so I suppose Carol has already mentioned it, that the peer support volunteer will be required to be able to give a minimum of 2 years commitment. And that's really so that there's consistency. It also takes, when you take in training, you know, we're investing in people to upskill, etc. And so it's for all of those bits, we need to have a minimum of 2 years. And the other thing that there's a requirement around is attending regular branch update meetings, so that people will be able to feedback what's working well, you know, where is the pilot at the moment, what are the plans going forward. So with all of those sort of under the belt, looking at what's next. Well, the next thing really on the agenda will be the expression of interest. The expression of interest is really, if you're interested, and hopefully we haven't put you off, we have to give you the details so you can make an informed decision. You know, but it's not onerous, but it does require some commitment. But if you're interested, so there is an expression of interest form. It's not an onerous one. It just asks for some basic background information. We also look for what your interests and hobbies are and what your skills are. And part of the reason for that is so that when we're doing matching, we can match people with maybe someone who they may say they'd like someone with a similar interest. So there would be very different reasons why people might be matched together. So that's why we ask for that. We're also interested in knowing what motivated you to actually submit your expression of interest. So what is it? You know, at this time, is there a particular reason? So it would be good for us to know that. We also would need to know your availability to engage. So can you commit to it? It's a really important right now. If you were to make that application, can you commit to it? And then in that, there's also a disclosure declaration. Now that is standard on all such forms. And it basically, it's just if anyone has a conviction in the past, it won't bar them from being considered, but it's something that we do need to know, because Garda vetting is one of the things that we actually do have to comply with. So that's a really important piece. So the recruitment and selection piece. So as I've mentioned, the expression of interest, that's the next piece that comes. Following on, and I'll give you the timelines at the end. Well, we've the expression of interest. Then when all the expressions of interest come in the end of July, we'll be looking at shortlisting. And really, you know, we're hoping that there'll be about 10, maybe up to a max of 15 people will be in the pilot phase. So so obviously it depends on what comes in, and I'll talk about the shortlisting in a moment. Then for those who are shortlisted, there'll be an informal interview. It's really just so that it'll help us make a final decision around, you know, for the pilot, who's best placed at this moment in time. And then we'll be notifying people. So when it comes to the selection, again, this is something we've already covered, a lot of this already. So we're looking for people who have had the personal lived experience or family experience of ESKD, those who are in a position to commit to requirements. Again, looking at your positive attitude. And I remember years ago working with Mother Teresa when she was live, and she said to me one time, she says, I only take people who have a good sense of humor. A sense of humor is a really important piece. You know, if you were to not succumb to being brought down by difficulty, and it's really an important piece. So again, the other thing that we'll be looking is to make sure that you've managed your own experience of kidney disease, and have good communication skills and openness to engage with assessment, but also openness to engage with the whole process. You know, are you open to be part of the team? So will you work well as part of a team? So these are really all important pieces. The selection of peers. Some of the things we'll also look at is we're looking for people who are passionate about the emotional and physical health and well-being of themselves and others. We're looking for people who have good people skills and experience working with others. So any experience that you have in the past will really help. People who are committed to the requirements of the role, and that takes in the supervision, I'm calling that supervision. Reflective practice is part of supervision, where you reflect on how you do your role and ongoing development. So being open to, from time to time, there will be trainings that will come up, and being open to do those. And that's really good for yourself as well. So but it's just to tell you that there will be from time to time. And then can give and take feedback and have a healthy balance between empathy and self-care. And on the actual training itself, there is also a day on preventing vicarious trauma, compassion, fatigue, and burnout. So we are looking at your self-care. It's very much part of the package that's been offered. And really, they have really invested in that, which is it's wonderful to hear that and be aware of. Other factors that will come into play when making selections, we need to have, I suppose, a range between gender. We'll need to have a mix between patients and family members. We'll need to have a range of people, and this is obviously, it depends on who comes in, who comes forward, and who applies. But if we have too many people, we may have to make a delineation based on, if everyone is at the same stage, we may have to, or there's most people in one, we may have to do a mix. And then looking at diversity, and that also takes in like age profile. It'll also take in geographical areas. So really what we're really trying to do is build up a resource so that anyone who comes looking for peer support, we'll be able to support them as best we can. There's no perfect fit, but we'll do our utmost to make it as close as possible. When it comes to the matching process, again, we're the people who are going to engage in looking for peer support, the formal peer support, will be asked to, and they will be supported to fill out a very simple form again. And the form will actually look, I suppose they will be asked a couple of things around what their interests are. Will want to know what stage they're at, whether they have, why they want it now, because they may have had a diagnosis a long time ago, but now they're looking for it now. So we might need to look at what that's about. We want to know what they're looking for from peer support. And we'll also want to ask them things like what helps them cope, because it'll help us look at their resources and matching them with someone else. And really, if there's anything that, any additional information that might be helpful for us to know, there's always that's that piece. But also where we try to accommodate them as best we can. So we will look to see, would they have a preference around gender, age range, interest, culture? So everyone is different, so people may have a different desire. So we will try and meet that as best we can. So the next steps and timelines. So hopefully this brings the whole thing together, and I hope I haven't bamboozled you with too much information, but it's a toe in the water this evening. So really the next steps. So we're talking about, today is number one on that journey. Today's session is the information session. From today, the expression of interest will go live, and the closing date will be the 15th of July. So any of you who may be interested in applying for consideration, the 15th of July is the cutoff date. Then the selection process will begin at that stage. So we'll be looking at shortlisting and then doing the informal interview. So in the second week of August, that's when that selection will be taking place. We will be looking at the induction training, which will commence in September. So that's your timeline on that. And then the referrals and the peer matching will start in October. So I suppose the formal service itself will commence in October. So I think that's where we're at the moment. Is there anything, Carol, you wanted to add that I may have left out?
Yeah, the main thing I wanted to add is that, this is the first time that many people are seeing this. So it might appear very, very complicated or very onerous. And, I know myself, I'm being a patient that, when you've been ill or been out of work, your self-confidence can go down a lot. So I don't want that to put people off, because we are going to provide training and we're going to really stress the levels of support that we are going to provide. And I'm very confident with the training program we've developed, and we'll have other peer supporters coming in to provide training, that with the right training, anybody who's interested and motivated, that they will actually be very, very confident by the time they finish their training. So what we're trying to do is give you a toe in the water. So it may seem a little bit intimidating, but if we really want to achieve this, where we get to the stage where we can have people working in the dialysis units, we've got to do it right from the start. But it's stepping stones. So I don't want anybody to be put off by saying, actually, this looks far too much, I don't want to do this, because we are going to provide the training.